Welcome to the study. This is Professor Hemlock here today with APMBillion. APM, please introduce yourself for those who might not know you and let everyone know just how great of an arcane mage you actually are.
Hi. Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm APMBillion, and I'm just a normal Arcane Mage player. So I'm currently rank one Arcane Mage, but I really didn't mean to be the best Arcane Mage. And I think I wouldn't be the best one if all the good players were playing Arcane. And yeah, that's
No kidding. You actually don't think you'd be the best. How long have you been playing
yeah.
Arcane?
So actually, I played uh WoW since vanilla, but I didn't do raid until Mist of Pandaria. So yeah, I've been playing Mage since vanilla.
Wow. All right. That's actually an interesting question. It kind of leads right into the next question here. So why Arcane instead of Fire? What made you decide to pick Arcane up? Is definitely it's not the best spec right now.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a long story. I chose to play Arcane because I want to play Mage, and I don't like the design of the other two specs. So so I actually played all three specs before Legion, and but I think Mage as a class has been destroyed since Legion. So I don't like Flurry, and I don't like the Fire Blast without a GCD, and it just feels very stupid. And in BFA, they actually made the situation even worse by giving a global cooldown to Arcane Power. So eventually I didn't play Legion and BFA, but I think in Shadowlands, Arcane Mage has gained some complexity back, and complexity is really what makes the game fun. Then I decided to play this game again, and I chose Arcane because it's harder to play.
Interesting. That is an interesting opinion there. I definitely like as a much more. I'm definitely not as good as you at
Mm.
the game, and I love Arcane for that same complexity. It's just a. It's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
much more fun to play, but it's interesting the opinion on Fire. You don't like the Fire Blast being off the GCD.
that's
Is it?
right.
How do you think that's really made Fire feel? I mean, to me personally, it kind of it's one button. It's the combustion spec, and that's all it is. Might as well
Yeah, yeah,
call it fire combustion.
yeah. Yeah, so I really like the old design, in Mist of Pandaria. So it just, it's hard to say. It just feels very bad if Fire Blast doesn't have a cool GCD. It feels very very bad.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's kind of move on to Arcane here. So,
Mm,
something I want to really bring up here is, you talk about the complexity of Arcane and how it's
mm,
difficult to play. There's a pretty large gap between what is an average parse, and we're looking more at heroic here because there's a
mm,
very limited amount of parses for Arcane on Mythic.
yeah.
There's a large gap between those average parses and the top parses. Do you think that's more to do with Arcane being not viable, as in the DPS is too inconsistent, or do you think it's more just related to player skill and there's not a lot of people practicing Arcane?
Mm. Well, a very good question. So I think playing Arcane is not like gambling. So well, you can't do consistent damage if you know what you're doing. So um, well, it is true that you may have one or two bad fights occasionally, but RNG is always an important factor in this game, and it's not just Arcane. So let's say that you're playing Elemental Shaman, and if you get a lot of Aftershock procs, then your damage is gonna be insane. So, and it's true for every single class. And I think the gap between the parses just reflects the skill gap between players. Because the player base is too small. And I think if all good players are playing Arcane, the gap wouldn't be this large.
Yeah, interesting. There is a very few parses of Arcane. I've always wondered that too. Is what would increase the parses of Arcane? What would make more players want to play Arcane? I mean, because if you say it's like there is potential to put up big numbers, what is really steering people away from it?
Um, I think it's because people are following the top players, the mages in Limit, in Echo, they are playing Fire. But, the thing is, they are playing a very different game here. You know, because Fire has more flexibility, and flexibility is very important if you're playing at that high level. But, for most players, this is not the case. I think there's no problem with Arcane if you know, playing you're playing as a normal player. And I think the problem is people like to follow the top players, and that's not usually useful because they're playing a very different game.
It's so that
Mhm.
that just struck a chord with me. I have, that's
Mhm.
kind of why I created my YouTube channel was I feel like no one plays Arcane because no one gave Arcane the chance to be played. If
Mhm.
people
Yeah.
played it, they would understand that it's very viable. I mean, I'm
Right. Yeah.
pretty consistently in the top 3 DPS in my guild, and I top meters all the time in Mythic Plus content, and I don't
Mhm.
think I'm anything special, but no one gives Arcane the chance.
Right. Right.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that I got to agree with you there. That's probably one of my biggest, like, what I want to get across with Arcane.
Mhm.
And this kind of leads me to today. You posted a video of playing Venthyr, and you just
Yeah.
freaking destroyed. You
Yeah.
destroyed,
Yeah.
man. 6.8k DPS on Hungering
Yeah, and that,
Destroyer.
that wasn't a perfect fight either. So it would be higher if if the proc at the right time. But anyway.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, 6.8k DPS without things lining up for you. I'm like struggling to keep that 5k figure all fight. I'm like, man, you're out here pulling 6k DPS plus, not even trying, not even getting things right. Well, I know you have Kyrian lined up to be played in the next few weeks,
Mhm.
whenever you get the time to. This
Mhm.
is definitely my favorite build of the expansion. I love doing this build, and I think the playstyle to me feels like how I want Arcane to be played. Can you kind of give me some of your sneak peeks there? Do you have any
Mhm.
strategies for the build? Does it have certain weaknesses or strength that you think compared to the other builds?
Mhm. Well, I think Kyrian is very good in single target fights, and it can do very insane funnel damage. But I think the rotation is very delicate because you have to cast Arcane Blast during a burn phase, and I think the biggest weakness is the cooldown. As Kyrian, you can't use Arcane Prodigy, but having a short cooldown can give you a lot of flexibility, and which Kyrian doesn't have. And so I think those are the strengths and weaknesses. And I want to mention something, which is Kirin does rely on RNG. So most people think that Kirin doesn't rely on luck because it doesn't have to do preparation phase. But the problem is it relies on the damage from your arcane barrage. So for example, if your barrage hits for 80k normal, then it means that your crit, if you crit, you get 80k extra damage, which means you get 80k free damage just by critting one spell, and that's a lot of uncertainty. So, but overall, I think Kyrian is fantastic, and I think I was wrong in the video I made. I would recommend Kyrian over Necrolord. But anyway, all covenants are very balanced, so you don't have to switch if you don't want to.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I actually didn't know if you would say that Kyrian would be, more viable than Necro Lord, but I definitely have felt the pains of not critting on Arcane Barrage way too
Yeah,
many
that's right.
times.
Yeah.
You go from having your Touch of the Magi hit for 90,000 when you crit, and then it, hits for 40,000 when it doesn't, and you're like,
Mhm.
oh, my
Right, right.
heart, my
Yeah.
DPS meters, where'd they go?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, so I gotta agree with that. As much as I
Mhm.
love the consistency of Kyrian, the crit RNG, I've started stacking
Mhm.
crit really high. Do you think
Mhm.
Kyrian's gonna have like a heavier crit focus on secondary stats than any other build, or are you gonna still kind of play it the
Um,
same?
I think I would still play the same. You know, that RNG is something always there. You just have to, take it.
Yeah, sadly, RNG always exists. That's why it
Mm.
happens when I open my loot boxes every week. Anyways, on to the next question here. Kind of talking about how different covenants function and like how Venthyr plays different and Curium plays different and Necrolord kind of
Mm.
plays different, involving different aspects of RNG and how they function. Uh, if you could pick one thing to really change how Arcane functions or buff how Arcane functions,
Mm.
what would that be? What would you do?
Um, well, I think Arcane is pretty good right now. It's good enough right now. But uh, well, as I said, Arcane, well, Fire has more flexibility, and so that's why in the top 30 guilds they always play Fire rather than Arcane. But I think for most players, Arcane is good enough. But if I could pick one buff, I would buff the mana because mana is really the root of all problems. Yeah, so if we have enough mana, we can have haste. If we have haste, we our rotation feels less clunky, and that the mana is really the root of everything.
Oh yes, everyone talks about the mobility issues with Arcane, and
Mhm.
I got to agree. I don't really feel like the mobility is so hampering that it's ruining the spec. But
Mhm.
what I do feel like is ruining the spec is when I go and I have to sit there and hard
Yeah.
cast blast from no charges, and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, hitting for 600 is really fucking up my DPS right
Yeah.
now.
It feels bad. Mm.
Do you think, expanding upon that, do you think a mana regen buff, like increasing our mastery effect, would be better, or maybe decreasing the cost of four charge arcane blast or missiles? What would be the best route to go about with that, or is it just kind of a anything is better to make the situation function?
Well, I don't know because because the way mastery is designed, I think we will have enough mana in 9.1 or 9.2. I mean, I don't know for sure, but that's my guess. So think about it. If if we have enough mana in 9.0, that means we'll have excess mana in 9.1 and 9.2, right? That's probably not something they want to see. So if we want to have just enough mana in 9.2, that means we will not have enough mana in 9.0. That's probably how it works. So I guess it will get better in next patch.
That's kind of that's a great point to bring up for the next content cycle. We're gonna get more secondary stats. With those increase in secondary stats and more primary stat, will Arcane
Mhm.
gain viability? And kind of generally, my question is, how will more secondary stats in all secondary stats improve Arcane's gameplay? Will we start seeing like different types of playstyles?
Mhm. Uh, Probably, yeah. So you know, for other classes, the secondary stats, the basically just your damage. But for arcane, especially mastery, really affects our rotation. So yeah, maybe so. For example, if you have arcane prodigy and uh having more mana means more cooldown reduction. So maybe if we have more mastery, our arcane power cooldown will be shorter in next patch. Yeah, so it will have some uh, well, it will have some influence, but I don't think there's much. There's I think basically everything will be similar unless they change unless they make very significant changes.
So that's an interesting point to bring up. Something I didn't consider for those who are not as familiar with Arcane spec. Our mastery, the more mastery you have, the more mana pool you have, and all spells cost a base percentage of mana. So, say you have 10,000 mana, and Arcane missiles cost 50% of your mana pool, it would cost 5,000 mana. Our clear cast proc chance is increased by the amount of mana you spend. So essentially, what he's saying is if you have more mana pool, you're going to spend more mana, you spend more mana, you get more clear cast procs, and therefore getting more clear cast procs reduces the cooldown of AP, which will make it so you'll have more consistent uptime on high DPS burn phases. And
Right.
that's a really good point. I totally didn't even think about how effective that could be.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how that goes. I mean, especially what is mastery caps around 1,100, 1,200 secondary stats. Do you think you're gonna try stacking more? Do you think diminishing returns are gonna affect that, or how do you think that's gonna play an impact for the diminishing returns that got added in Shadowlands?
Well, I think the diminishing return is let me check. I think it's 1050, something like that.
1,050. Okay, yeah, I wasn't exactly sure on the exact value, but I knew it was ballpark in there.
Yeah, so that probably means that we will hit the diminishing return in next patch. But I guess that means we just want some haste, maybe. So for example, in this patch, I have 0 haste and my mastery is something like 940. So in next patch, I might hit the diminishing return. That means I probably want some haste. So I I think I wouldn't go over that diminishing return, but I don't know for sure. Maybe I will.
Yeah, very interesting though. That is a very high mastery figure. I mean,
Mhm.
and 0% haste. I'm interested to
Yeah,
see how you play Kyrian when you do 0 haste. I mess up way too
yeah,
much and I have 8%.
but I think for Kyrian you do want some haste. Yeah, about 8 to 10%, maybe something like that.
All right, that's what I like playing with. I think 8% feels the best for me. But
Mhm.
anyways, I really want to thank you so much for bringing attention to the Arcane
Mhm.
and really starting to build more acceptance for the spec. I mean, you got featured on one of the main World of Warcraft pages, and you had like 40,000
Mhm.
views on your 10k DPS Sludge Fist
Mhm.
pull. And ever since
Mhm.
then, I've even started to have people like that talk to me. They're like, "Oh man, Arcane, it's viable, it's a thing," and I'm like, "Man, I've been
Yeah,
saying that from day one."
yeah, of course.
uh, so I think there's going to be a lot of new players starting to see Arcane, especially
Mhm.
watching your videos and hopefully watching
Mhm.
some of my videos. What do you think you would give them as a piece of advice for players just starting out with Arcane?
Mhm. Well, I would say that you want to be prepared that Arcane has a learning curve. It may take a very long time before you can do good damage, and so be patient. And as Arcane, you want to if you want to do high damage, you need to be very familiar with the fights. So you need to spend some time to think about the fights before the progression. So yeah, that's very important.
Oh, good gosh, I can't tell you how important that one is. I just too much agreement there. The
Yeah.
amount of times that my first pull on a fight is just absolutely atrocious. And by the 20th pull, I'm like, all right, we're
Yeah.
doing some damage now.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, thank you so much for taking the time to do the
Mhm.
interview, and I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing more of your videos. And yeah, you're just a great player, and I'm really happy you got made some time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem.
Mm.
That's where I'm ending here on the video. Thank you everyone for watching, and hope you enjoyed the
Yeah.
video.